Hi, I'm Richard Brent, the editor-in-chief here at Briefing Magazine, which is the only UK legal business management publication that's focused exclusively on improving the work and worlds of operational and management leaders at leading UK law firms, often international firms as well, of course. Thanks all for joining us for this session in our Briefing Knowledge Leaders series for 2021, a virtual series, of course. This is an ideas exchange forum, and this one is focused on achieving the optimum document toolkit for digital and dispersed working. If we do see a future of more hybrid working arrangements in the mid to longer term, how well equipped do firms feel that they are for that from a document production, collaboration and process perspective? And what do they still need potentially in that toolkit? It's really excellent to see familiar briefing faces in the meeting with me today. Thank you very much. We've also, as you may know, created a private guild for this knowledge sharing community. I think many of you have been invited to that, where the conversation can continue. A couple of points to get into before we get into the main discussion. The session is being recorded today, and it will be available on briefing.co.uk and our social media channels at Briefing shortly after this event, as well as distributed to the Briefing audience. As co-chair, I'll be inviting people to offer their perspectives, share their experiences, but please also do feel free to speak and respond to each other in your own time about anything that you wish to. We'll be running a really quick poll about halfway through the session, so please do take part in that as well. It's just two very quick questions. And we've designed today's session in partnership with Litera, so I'm pleased to welcome Abhijat Saraswat, who is Vice President of Sales at Litera. Hello, Ab.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Ab is co-chairing this with me. Litera, of course, a leading provider of software for law firms and other document-intensive organizations, focusing on the document drafting lifecycle, from creation to proofreading to comparing, cleaning, and distributing content. And Litera Desktop, in particular, designed to reduce the complexity of a cluttered desktop and dealing with inefficient sharing between different tools and screens. So very much on point for the conversation today. So we're talking about a digital document toolkit, and I thought it might be best to start off with some sort of understanding of what that means to you, if it does. Is it something that you think about yourself in terms of having? What is it that you already have that you need in order to allow lawyers to work in a remote fashion digitally? Who can sort of kick us off on that one?
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, Lucy, thank you.
Lucy Dillon, Chief Knowledge Officer at Reed Smith. I think the document drafting is something that we do, day in, day out. I think the thing that, and we have a document management system, we have a number of Litera products that help us with our document production. I think challenge this year, like many others, is document collaboration. So drafting in real time. We all have to sit within our document management systems. A lot of the kind of instant drafting tools sit outside, and that's been challenging. Keeping our documents within our security system, but allowing that free flow of drafting when you can't sit in a room together. We've been, I think, if I just think about the things that have been have come up, we've come up as an issue for us. It's been that. How do we do that drafting in real time?
Okay, and collaboratively as well. That's the point.
Yes. Collaborative document review in real time.
Lucy, have you had much experience with the multiplayer, sort of basically using things like Word Online, or having at least the internal individuals work collaboratively in that sense, or is it mostly with clients?
It's mostly with clients.
I think there's a place for it internally as well. We've certainly seen a growth in interest and use of co-authoring tools where you have multiple people working on a document at the same time. And I think versioning on that is more tricky to sort of delineate. This is, well, we've decided this is a new version, this is a point in time at which we would like to come back to. I know that versioning is possible with co-authoring tools, but that's something we've seen an interest in, and you know, the tools, there's lots of different tools out there to co-author at the same time, but it's choosing the right one and the right way of accessing it's been a bit of a challenge.
And I think the ongoing challenge for us then is, and it's probably related to some of these challenges, is doing it securely with clients, doing it effectively internally, ensuring the integrity of the matter file on our DMS, which is I manage, and the strategic issues, I guess, for us around the fact that a lot of those co-authoring tools, if you think about, you know, even sort of Word Online, Office 365 environment, are cloud-based solutions. We've got real, you know, ongoing client challenges with that. So there's a whole landscape of, you know, working practices, regulatory demands, you know, client issues that are really difficult to unpick.
Yeah, we've got information barriers, a really clear example of that, in that, you know, at a DMS level, we can impose an information barrier, but if your co-authoring solution is Word Online, then you need to, you know, bring that information barrier into that environment so that it's not, so only the right people can access and co-author it, and that's bringing challenges.
I think being in lockdown's really thrown into sharp relief the diversity of the way different people work across the business. We're finding real pockets of working practices and the way they store their favourite documents, or the way they do things. So with sudden realisation of needing to streamline certain ways of doing things and what our information architecture really should be. But I guess this has given us an opportunity to step back and think about that, because people are realising that everybody needs to find stuff. You can't just work in a little silo with your favourite folder behind your desk. Yeah.
So is there a push to achieve greater consistency of process then at the moment? Is that something that you're very focused on?
Yes, I'm leading a particular project in relation to looking at our information architecture piece to really step back and see where people are putting things and where they ought to be put. It'll obviously support risk and compliance with their work as much as the tech team to build the most sensible repositories for certain types of information.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I just add that I think the challenges of diversity within the firm, but also obviously out with the firm with different requirements, different clients having different requirements, and you know, we move quickly to collaborative working on various platforms, and yet needing really, I think, to have real clarity about the sort of protocols in place, and I think certainly the sort of risk aspects have already been mentioned. That's really important to deal with that as we continue to adapt to this working environment. Although building on Lucy's point, to some extent, you know, these issues were issues anyway. So I think the pandemic has really just brought them into stark relief.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, pretty much everything everyone has said does resonate with me. I think there were real issues around maintaining integrity of the DMS and compliance and reflecting, you know, the correct information barriers. But I think the sort of knock-on effect of that we're seeing as well is that it's really affecting adoption for online collaboration, and we use Teams for that. So we do have the whole client consent piece, you know, rumbling on in the background as well. But what we're finding is a lot of lawyers, and it's, you know, it's not practice specific, it's very much an individual thing. Some people actually avoid collaborating on, you know, on Word Online because they're not sure what to do or how to maintain the integrity. So they will just fall back to sharing on the DMS instead. And everyone's worried about having sort of, you know, a shadow DMS or losing control of the version. So rather than actually just go down that route, they stop using it entirely. So we've got pockets who are really reluctant to adopt, but also right. we've pockets of people who are not at all reluctant, and then perhaps sort of becoming, you know, gaining some bad habits along the way because they're developing their own new processes. So this whole sort of idea of, I guess, content governance across the estate, whether it's whether it's iManage, whether it's Teams, whether it's Word Online and Microsoft 365, is just getting our arms around that and preventing, because I think it's been, you know, a very, very speedy adoption over the course of the last sort of 10 months or so, and sort of getting our arms around that before we lose control of it entirely and have a whole set of new problems to address.
Yeah, Trish, you mentioned governance. That was the word that sprung to mind when I was listening to you there, and we're having, you know, the same challenges in that we've got a DMS which is, you know, we want to be the definitive record matter for the client, and yet if there are other versions or other documents that are taken out of that environment and worked on in Teams, as an example, then, well, which is our record? Is it one, or is it other? Is it both? Well, clearly it is both, but you know, you could have, in theory, one lawyer going into the DMS to check out a document and work on it and find that there's another version being worked on somewhere else, and that's a real problem that we're trying to figure out. So, I mean, we've approached it by saying, generally speaking, you do not work on client matters within Teams, and we'll keep the DMS as our one place to go, but we're going to need to work around that. It's
yeah, and we're relying on, I guess, guidance and best practice on behalf of the individual lawyer to check it out, you know, before they work on a Teams, and check it back in or not and that's just too risky, because even, you know, the most compliant of people, you know, will forget on occasion, and there is going to be problems. And I think, you know, there are various tools out there for sort of, you know, integrating with your DMS, but none of them are really actually crack the problem just yet. So I think that's an area, I think, that before adoption is embraced, I think, and you know, how people work is really transformed, I think we do have to kind of crack that, maintaining the integrity across both environments.
Yeah, and I was going to say that there are a number of products that are coming out now where, you know, they claim makes it sound like they can't do it, but you know, that you will have that link between your DMS and Teams, so that, you know, any document that you open will still be with it, even if it's in Teams, it's within your document management system. That would make me much more comfortable around you know, having that Teams environment. And just one other thing, that for those of you who have iManage, apparently they are, but it's in their cloud version, they have a collaborative drafting platform, which I don't think has quite been released yet, but they're addressing that. Now, how that will integrate with Teams or any other platform, I don't know, but you know, they're aware that this is an issue that we need to crack if we're going to keep, you know, the integrity of the documents within the document management system. We have to have a way of being able to work collaboratively on documents in real time.
Yeah.
Can I just pick up on the governance point, because it's clearly something that's been exercising a lot of attention internally for us as well. Have others been involved in really the real fluid and dynamic changes to policy around usage of these tools? Because that's something that I think we've probably got the balance wrong on, that we've been very restrictive in theory in our initial policies about how we might deploy these tools and the new functionality, to such an extent actually that I think we've just generated a shadow industry, which was worse than actually rolling out the full functionality of the products. I don't know if that's an experience others have shared.
I think we've certainly had a similar experience, and I've just realised I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Trish Sachani, I'm Head of Legal Knowledge Technology at Allen & Overy. We've had a very similar experience to what you describe. I think, particularly in relation to Teams, we rolled it out really quickly, and to some extent, actually, we stripped out some of the most useful elements in it because of, you know, that general nervousness. And then to another extent, actually, we've applied probably lighter governance in certain areas where it should have been heavier. We allow anyone to create a team, which already we've got, you know, quite a few that have been created, most of which probably need to be reviewed and cut back immediately. Like, so we've definitely got the balance wrong, and one of our big focus areas right now is actually stepping back and go, oh, hold on a minute, what should this look like, and how should we be doing this? And there's that sort of, you know, security and compliance aspect to that, but there's also how do we do this in such a way that you know, the lawyers and the users can actually get the best from these tools, and we're not sort of, you know, we're not you know, cutting them off at the knees before we even start, because I think there's a real risk of doing that as well.
Yeah.
Can I pick up on Emily's point?
Sorry, go ahead.
Emily's point about the bottom drawer having been taken away because of forced separation, physical separation. I'm curious to know whether people think, because I think one of the challenges is making sure our lawyers, since they don't have their bottom drawer, they now have to use electronic means to get access to whatever they need. So making sure that they can get access to the tools, resources, information, documents, and so on that they need. Have be interested in thoughts on your sense as to whether that has encouraged people to explore tools and platforms that they might not otherwise have been so excited about using.
Absolutely, I think I think necessity is the mother of invention, and
yeah.
driving our sort of information services team towards digital first, and you know, cutting down the volume of hard copy and physical library content for a while, and meeting some resistance with, you know, I need my corporate tax handbook, I need some of this content, it's got to be sat on my desk, otherwise it's useless. And people realizing that, well, I can't access all those physical documents anymore, and they are adapting to the online versions that we've been buying. And so that's been really successful. I think, you know, the digital versions are kept up to date more often, they're accessible to all time of day, all time of night. And so there's lots of good reasons for that. And I'm definitely seen a shift towards people accessing information and knowledge online using these sorts of tools. But the other thing I've noticed is that I think the demand on our PDLs, our practice development lawyers, has escalated. This demand for information and to be pointed to the right source and thirst for knowledge over the last year. I think a bit of hand-holding involved as well. Just, can you help me through this, please? I think they've been really stretched as a resource over this last year.
Tim, was there an element of that resistance journey to go on even in the last year? Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, there has. Well, no, I'd say the resistance has crumbled somewhat in the last year, in the face of necessity. But it was something we'd been pushing for a good number of years, and people pushing back, saying, no, we need hard copies of these certain core texts or these certain core elements. I like a tangible thing that I can leaf through. I get that, but it's not actually particularly. It's not as good a return on value for the whole of the business if it sitting on one lawyer's desk, when in fact it could be an online one version available to all. So I think the resistance, we're meeting less and less of it. I think people are now seeing the benefits of the online versions and getting used to navigating them. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, I give a prize to anyone who's managed to persuade a tax lawyer that they don't need their orange and yellow handbooks, because that is a battle.
Exception, isn't it?
I mean, there are exceptions that prove the rule.
Yeah.
But I'm going to flag this, but I don't know the answer. But I wonder what they do in Germany or other markets where the products really aren't available online.
They have big libraries.
Yeah, they do. I still spend a lot of money on books, and my colleagues in Hamburg.
Yeah.
Really?
And yeah, I agree with you, Lucy. I remember briefly suggesting taking hard copy books away from our tax partners, and it was like Armageddon.
Haven't managed yet. I've tried in 3 different firms, and I haven't managed to do it yet. But I think what we have found, and to Tim's point, people, because change has been so dramatic, people have been open to doing things differently that they would never have imagined before, and sort of people becoming their own help desk, IT help desk, in terms of being much more prepared to try new things and experiment a little bit. And one of the things we're talking about is how can we keep that you know, that curiosity going, because there's so much change that we have still yet to do. And, you know, the pandemic has created, you know, opportunities we hadn't thought of. You know, we don't want people to revert to type, you know, in whatever brave new world we have coming, hopefully later this year, because, you know, we want to keep people agile and working differently.
Yeah, I agree with that. We had a happy coincidence, if there ever could be a happy coincidence associated with lockdown. I was halfway through our project to launch a new version of our intranet, and I have to say we sort of made extra efforts to get it launched as soon as possible after lockdown, because we felt it really mattered to the firm in lots of ways beyond just purely getting hold of the precedent. And it couldn't have happened at a better time. So we're hoping that engagement will continue, because we've really seen people, you know, getting hold of it and buying into it, and actually for the first time not just using it as a place to find stuff when they absolutely have to, but actually actively contributing to it and sharing their stories on it. So we're really hoping that we can kind of keep that momentum going as we move into the next phase, where hopefully people will be back in the office more. But yeah, it worked out very well for us from a project perspective, because we kind of it answered its own question as to why we needed it. So, but we're hoping to carry it on.
Thank you, Emily. We can talk a bit more about the change management aspect of all of this actually in the second half. Maybe just come to Ab before we do that very quick poll I mentioned, and say, Ab, what do you make of what you've heard so far, and is that what you have in mind when you talk about, you know, a digital toolkit fit for the next normal, or whatever other phrase you might want to use?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the phrase would be that I would use, but that's probably as good as any, to be honest. Yeah, I think, you know, certain things that we tend to hear quite a lot, and I tend to hear it just around governance, around just maintaining. And there's always this dichotomy between the use of the tool in different scenarios, and Teams is certainly one of them. And I know probably as many firms that are opening up Teams at least to external client interaction as are firms that are saying, absolutely, we're not going to do that. We have other tools where you can do. So it's really finding a place for where those different tools serve purpose. Someone mentioned a point around, you know, having I think in fact, Richard, you mentioned a point around having standardization in your creativity in some way, or having consistency there. That's important. And then managing your information, both from a DMS perspective, but more at a more document level, at an individual matter level, right? Where do people go? How do you actually make sure that they're able to access information they need routinely to work on matters and to work on drafts? Because it's not always we need the precedent, but sometimes it's we need to be able to access and think about the work product that we worked on a year ago, 2 years ago. And sometimes it's not as easy as just going down the hall or going to the office of, you know, an associate or partner you worked on it before with. You then have to understand, where is that stored now, when all you have is just some disparate memory of it, right? So that search element becomes really important too. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I have too much more to add beyond what's been said here. All the same problems are ones that lots of people are trying to solve. It's difficult to actually define what the exact problem is, because every firm has a mix of different elements and different weightings applied to it as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ab. So very quick poll, as I mentioned. Azalise, can we have the first question up, please? Tracy, I beg your pardon. Oh, we've got both of them. Okay. So first one is, do you find that a digital toolkit, assuming you have one, is inherently helpful to you or your team? I suppose that is about, you know, knowing exactly what is in that toolkit for remote workers. And question 2 is, do you have a team focused on adoption change management in that respect? And I think you can vote on both of those at the same time. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you, Tracy. Hopefully, fairly nice and easy one. We didn't put a don't know option, so so I hope it's nice and easy anyway. Well, that is That is a news story there. 100% say yes to both of those things, which I suppose is good to know. Okay, so everyone does have a team focused on adoption and change management. I suppose that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, or that it doesn't need some change in how change is managed when people are working in such a different way. So to come on to the sort of the discussion around getting the right behaviours that you're looking to get out of people working remotely, et cetera, et cetera. I was going to pick up on one of the points that Lucy made, which was about this maintaining this idea of curiosity about doing things differently and doing things better. And I just wondered, maybe if I start with you, Lucy, whether that is sort of about carrying on that natural momentum, or are you in managing that having to do specific things differently in order to keep people curious?
Not yet, because I think people are still, they're still working remotely. I think people have now got comfortable with a number of the things that they've never had to think about before. So doing things like this, signing document, using DocuSign, things that suddenly from one moment to the next, they had to become immediately familiar with. And then, online books and the kind of the document integrity piece around, suddenly working within the document management system. I think, there's I can't say everybody is being absolutely perfect, but I think there's a much better understanding of the value of it because we're working remotely. The point I was making is, as and when we return to whatever normal situation we have going forward, what we need to do is to keep this going, rather than people then slipping back into the habits of, I don't need to worry about all of this because there's someone who can take care of it for me, or none of these things are relevant, or I've made so much change now, I'm not going to bother anymore, because I think we haven't yet seen all the new ideas and products that will have come out of working remotely. At the moment, I think a lot of us are just making use of things that already existed, or reinforcing the use of things that already existed, some of which our internal clients weren't aware of. But there'll be a whole new set of products and services that will evolve out of last year, and we just need to keep people interested in moving forward on that digital transformation. Okay, yes, I see. Yeah. Is that on anyone else's radar, that maintaining the appetite for change, whether it is when the world changes again, or whichever horizon you're looking to in doing so?
Yeah, just a brief comment from me. Sorry, excuse me. Just on that point that Lucy made about actually some of it's about getting really good use out of things we already had. And I think that where we've been able to do that, I think that will continue, because I think people have seen the benefits, it sort of proved it. And I mean, I'm thinking about things that have been around for a while, like IQ Collaborate or something like that, and actually getting adoption right up and making far more use of existing technology. I think that's been a really positive thing out of this, and I suspect that will continue. I think it's where you've got around the edges, or we think we want to do things like co-authoring, but actually there's a whole behaviour piece there around having the confidence to use a tool like that, about having the skills, about being willing to be on the spot and do things in a very different way, where perhaps you haven't been used to being in a room and doing drafting with a whole bunch of people. So I think some of it is nuanced and probably will depend on the sorts of tools that we're talking about. But I certainly hope that we've all come a long way in terms of change management and bringing people with us and seeing those things embedded rather than just bringing out the latest new tool that looks very shiny. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I think there's a difference between a tool that you give to lawyers and say, like Teams perhaps, and say, here's a tool, here's a few things it might be able to do, have a go and see if it's useful, and tell us what works and what doesn't work. And it's sort of, and you can sort of rely on their creativity and allow them a bit of experimentation, and some things will work, some things won't work. Obviously there are risks around the governance and stuff we talked about. But then that's obviously that's one end of the spectrum. But then you've also got something that's much more structured, which represents an investment where you sort of need people to know about whatever it is, and understand it and use it. So a new DMS, for example, would be an extreme, or, you know, as Lucy said, Zoom and the other tools which people now have to use. I think that's where you need to perhaps take a more structured approach to how you tell people about it, train them to use it, and make sure they're following the appropriate guidelines.
Yeah, I found that really helpful, Mark, and it was that sort of that high trust model of letting people try stuff. Certainly really helped us around teams. We talked about this at a previous event in terms of encouraging, you know, people to see to what extent they could use it for, you know, doing client work. And they quite quickly surfaced all the issues with, you know, the way that our teams was configured, and said, you know, yeah, maybe, but not right now. And so rather than having to put rules around it or govern it, they just worked it out for themselves and told us. And then that's really invaluable in terms of managing internal stakeholders. Or one of our teams who sort of created a little shadow intranet know-how portal on Teams, and realised that they'd been a bit naughty, and then but then having tried to do it themselves, were then much more willing to have a conversation with me about, okay, well, let's bring that back into the fold of, this is the way that we manage this stuff internally. So, you know, coming back to some conversations earlier, you know, maybe I think about policies, I think, you know, balance of sort of freedom, and do you do stuff up front? Do you put controls in place? To what extent do you know, do things behind the scenes in terms of, we'll let you do this, but, you know, we're going to keep an eye on what you're doing, and we'll start to, you know, in the governance process, sort of turn stuff off, take stuff away, delete stuff if you're not using it. And so that balance between upfront controls and policies, letting people play so that we can learn and people can decide for themselves the things that you're going to tell them anyway, and then not, you know, letting stuff mushroom. And every talk that I've been to from Microsoft resellers is, you know, things like Teams will grow, you know, it's just managed growth, you know, you're never going to stop it happening. It's not in the nature of those tools, so it's just trying to get that balance right. And there's really good insights there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
On something I think Rachel, you mentioned, and Mark, Richard, what you guys are saying. So how do you manage things where you have the tools already and you're trying to just make sure, Rachel, as you put it, you're making the most out of those things, right? So that's about just ensuring that you're basically managing as much of the value from leaking out from your investment you've already made, and what you might be looking at. So Lucy, you're talking about digital transformation. So as you look forward next 6, 12, 24 months, things that you may want to do, how much of that is that high trust model that Richard, you mentioned, when it's something that you haven't as a business proven whether it will be useful for whatever you're trying to solve for? How do you manage that? Because I suspect that certainly is my experience, when we're trying to pitch a new product, you're not just going to say, sure, we'll take it and we'll just let everyone play with it and let you know how it goes, right? How do you manage that smaller group then?
I mean, I'm coming from the perspective of a mid-tier firm, so not a large law firm. And yes, two separate approaches, really. One, much more controlled and structured, goes through governance, our IT and innovation committees, you'd expect, all that kind of thing. But then on the side, a sort of separate stream for trying out new products in a safe way. So really just enabling that and recognizing it's something that we do want to do. But, you know, have to take a fairly thoughtful approach. I'm necessarily wanting to spend huge amounts on that, but we see an opportunity that fits in with our strategy around areas where we know we're trying to build new capabilities. And then, yes, we will try new products. We'll run a proof of concept in the way that all of us would, I'm sure. And then we'd start to explore whether we think that it's got legs and it's going to deliver the benefits that we think. But I would say relatively small scale, but yeah, a definite willingness. Certainly the barriers that were perhaps there years ago to doing that, no longer there.
One thing that's worked quite well for us, just on the kind of how best to make use of existing tools, as a recent set of short snippets that we've pulled together, which we're calling productivity hacks, which are, they either emanate from the Fiona community themselves, or from, like, we've got a number of sort of interested selected groups of fee earners and business services people, and just little snippets where, and that delivered at group meetings by an associate from that group, potentially together with a central person as well, is often, and very contextualized, highly contextualized to the kinds of work or the kinds of documents they'll be working on, has been really quite effective. And I think has opened people's eyes up to the panoply of resources they have available on our intranet, but sadly don't necessarily access. And I think has been opening their eyes up into the kind of the wealth of functionality that they have available to them already, without necessarily having to reach the latest, shiniest thing they've read about.
Okay. Let's move on to perhaps talking about driving collaborative behaviours specifically, whether that is, working together on documents or other processes that require collaboration. Is that something that you're having to proactively push people to do differently, or is that just that there's more remote collaboration than there used to be, for obvious reasons?
I think it requires a bit more work, but I wouldn't say that I'm pushing that particularly. I think that's again necessity. The lawyers are having to, rather than turn to the person next to them and say, let's take this into a quiet room and work on it, they're having to schedule a call to say, let's discuss this document and where we're going with this. So I think it requires a lot more work. The ad hoc meetings are now all structured, and you can't necessarily just grab someone at the time that looks good. But I'm not personally having to take any particular initiative on that. Okay. Maybe that's an oversight by me. But
it's mainly about finding the people and finding the time in diaries, for example, to do things. Okay. Anybody else?
No, I would echo what Tim said. I'm not finding that there's a need or a gap or a demand. People are doing it because people need to, and how they're doing it, they're using the tools that we have. And as I said, the only thing that I am hearing is, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? But then people are using Zoom or one of the other tools, and they're screen sharing, and somebody is typing while everyone else is inputting, and that's pretty good. I mean, it doesn't deal with the the document integrity if there's only one person editing. It's not ideal, but it works pretty well, and that's something that people are finding really works really well. But I'm not having to push that; they've kind of found it for themselves.
Again,
I was in a meeting. I was in a meeting last week, and I had a head of department actually say, which was a nice surprise, I think, that it actually made things easier to get things done, and some of the bigger deals he's working on, he was actually finding it more efficient, and that he was finding this out for himself. And that was quite nice to hear him comment.
Thank you. Jump to something completely different. Well, not completely different, obviously, but somewhat different. Somebody in providing some comments up front before the session, who isn't actually on the session, said so that they would put in their digital toolkit for documents, AI tools to be able to categorize documents, of course, apply metadata and monitor their use, lifecycle, etc. And it struck me reading that AI isn't something that we've been writing or even hearing that much about over the last year, perhaps because other things have taken priority. But I'd be very interested to know to what extent sort of recent years' investment in AI, or use another phrase for it if you like, have particularly helped in the current situation of more remote working. Is that something that you've seen benefit from in terms of efficient dispersed working? Anybody?
I mean, I think it's certainly an ongoing drive for us, and I think almost every firm had some force majeure type product that they spun up really quickly back last April. So I think I think there were some obvious opportunities there that were, I think, exploited by many firms, but I think for me, we still have a focus on how we sort of I guess, leverage the AI ML tool set to streamline the overall user experience or employee experience, which becomes kind of even more important in this kind of either remote workplace or hybrid workplace. So certainly we're starting to focus far more on things like personalization, which kind of harks back to the comments people have made about, you know, being able to search for content. It's actually starting to sort of connect these disparate systems together in a better way, so we can use, I guess, we can use AI and ML tools to, you know, to classify the documents, to extract and classify the documents in our document management system, to sort of really describe the work we've done to date. So therefore, when I'm sitting there, you know, starting to draft a new agreement, I don't have to go and search for, you know, useful precedents from similar deals. Actually, sort of aspirationally, what we want to get to is the point where we're recommending clauses. So not just having a clause library, but clause suggestions based on your client's preferred position on that particular clause, you know, for the last 3 deals, you know, in recent years, set alongside our standard form precedent wording, set alongside, you know, movements in the market around that. I mean, this is all aspirational now, but certainly sort of on a small scale, we are sort of exploring that for particular use cases. And the challenge then is going to be sort of, you know, how we can actually do that at scale, so we can bring benefit. But it's really thinking about, and you know, it's a very IT term, so I apologize, but it's like that digital workplace. So it's less about whether you're in the office or whether you're working remotely, but actually having at your fingertips all of the information and tools you need, and sort of being delivered to you instead of you having to go off and find them, if that makes sense. So it's very much a priority for us right now.
And I think, you know, I think you're right, Trish. You know, I think it's we all expect that kind of technology to be available to us, and so it's more about, well, what is the kind of project that I'm working on? So, you know, yes, I am working on, you know, data retention classification project. It's not an AI project, but absolutely, will I be, you know, need to be aware of and using those types of technologies to help with that, in the same way that, you know, our litigators, you know, were doing e-disclosure exercises for years before somebody said, oh, look, this is AI. So it's not new, and it's not new to legal work. And I also sort of expect that, you know, as a buyer of services, you know, I expect them to have clever technology, and I don't really want to know about that. I just want to know that it works, and, you know, how do I then apply it, and how do I make, you know, my teams, my colleagues' lives easier because that's available to them. And I think this is not part of my world, but I think, you know, I suspect our clients probably want the same thing. They don't want to know, you know, they probably want to know that we're doing their work, you know, as efficiently as possible, and ideally passing the cost savings on to them. But, you know, for its own sake, you know, I'm not sure people are interested.
Yeah, I think, and it's maybe a sort of a degree of maturity as well. That sort of, you know, where a couple of years ago there was all this AI hype within legal tech, and I think, you know, certainly sort of from the kind of automated document review side of things, it's just, you know, taken as a given for certain scenarios. You're going to use it now. It's just not that exciting anymore. But I don't think work has stopped. I think it's quietly continuing for most firms in the background.
Okay.
And I don't think that the pandemic has particularly changed the approach here. We were doing it before, and we're continuing to work on it. I don't think it's that, you know, remote working and so on has moved the dial particularly. Maybe I'm not close enough to know, but I don't think, you know, this work was still required, and the fact that we're working in lots of different offices now, the work's still required, and the technology is still being used. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Picking up on Richard's point about client expectation, I think absolutely right. They shouldn't really care. But I think what they do care about is the fact that we have got a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of, you know, documentation, because that's where our knowledge is, that they expect us to be able to access. So to Trish's point around having that system, the unicorn system of, you know, the recommendations that fit because it's the right industry, the right client, the right, you know, that's, you know, what the holy grail for all of us, but I think clients probably suspect that we have that already. But it's, you know, to get to that point will be a lot of work. But is absolutely what, you know, where we should be looking to forge the, you know, use AI internally to develop those tools.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Might just come to Susan Ford, because I'm conscious we haven't heard from you. Not to meaning to put you on the spot, but if you're happy to share whether any of the things that you've heard today particularly resonate with your strategy or your priorities at the moment. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you, Susan, but maybe that might be the reason you haven't been speaking up. Not to worry. It's nice to see you.
I had a quick question. Just to go back a step or two. So when we're talking about digital collaboration, I'm curious, for those that have a lot of offices, certainly in different countries and jurisdictions, have you found that those teams, whether it's practices or otherwise, that were previously working in a much more collaborative way because they had to, because they couldn't be in the same office, they are now able to share tips and so on to help other individuals who are more used to and basically being in the big hub, and now having to or had to evolve into learning how to work in a more digital way, for lack of a better word? Or is it a same challenge that you're having to solve across the board? And I say this because my team have been very much remote and dispersed, so it was pretty easy for us to transfer and just continue our way of working.
I think that's been my experience largely at Baker McKenzie as well, that a lot of teams are used to working in geographically very dispersed environments, and so you've had to rely on things like, we didn't have Zoom prior to the pandemic, but equivalent technologies. And so for those groups, not all that much has changed, is my perception.
And are you leveraging those groups to basically encourage the use of other tools, or as I think Tim said, people are just figuring out that stuff themselves and you guys are just there facilitating it?
I'm just talking as somebody who has offices all over the globe, like Mark. We haven't been called upon to do that, and I suspect that it is people sharing amongst themselves, because just going back to the Zoom document sharing thing, that suddenly exploded, and we've had very little involvement with that. And I suspect that it's people going, oh, but that's what you need to do, and a lot of sort of generic, learning from person to person. And then we're learning things that we didn't know. People are doing all kinds of creative things, and we're benefiting from that as well. And then, of course, we're then repurposing and recommunicating. But I think people are pretty good at, and I think that's one of the great things about the pandemic is, that people have had to communicate much more, and a lot more sharing about how to survive has taken place.
Has anybody here found that it has been harder to persuade people to share stories, to share insight into their own individual experiences of working from home, or are your experiences similar to Lucy?
Not found it any more difficult, I don't think. I think you have to work a bit more at communication here. You're not going to bump into people at the coffee point, but they're still happening. I think we're still getting people talking through teams like this, and actually, in a way, the fact that we're all geographically dispersed, I think people are working more cross collaboratively across offices, because you can resource it. Any deal according to capacity. You're not going to look immediately to your nuclear team in your local office, because no one's in your local office. But I think those those conversations, those sharing stories are still happening, but you just need to work a bit harder at it.
Mm-hmm. Emily, I think you were gonna say something then.
Yeah, no, I was going to confirm that I think by and large people have been really forthcoming and have used different formats to share their stories, whether it be a real push around departmental meetings or subgroups of departmental meetings, or we've had a whole series of people just offering up their thoughts and inspirational messages or woes on through the internet. We've been able to sort of use our homepage, part of our homepage, as a feed of anecdotes from people across the firm, and they've been hugely popular. You can tell that from the viewing stats, that people really want to hear how people are doing, whether it be on what they've been doing on a deal or how they've approached a particular task, but also, you know, how they're coping with all the other aspects that we're all dealing with. I think knowing that, you know, other people are going through the same journey is hugely rewarding.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us for this session, and to those of you who joined us for previous sessions in our Knowledge Leaders series this year. This is the final one. We'll of course be back in some form again, and Briefing Magazine continues. Our Knowledge Leaders supplement is in an issue that is coming out very soon, and I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thank you again, of course, also to Litera and to Ab for co-hosting with me today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.